Hello everyone, hopefully you're having a lovely day and perhaps even summer holidays. I'm Robert and this is the Scroll Ensemble Improvisation YouTube channel. In this video I want to talk about improvisation in my regular concert life, so when I'm not asked to improvise. For me, a regularly returning topic is how improvisation can be so separate from our usual music making. One might take a class, read about improvisation, love it, or like me, even regularly improvise using classical music in other situations. But this often takes place in a sort of separate universe. And for me, this is always a bit of a struggle. How much of my improvisation, Robert, can I show or use in the normal world? And of course, I should note that it's not always a choice. In some cases, it's simply not possible to be improvisational because one is not allowed to or not playing a part that warrants that. Lately, however, I was very lucky to have quite a few opportunities to bring improvisation into my regular concerts. And so I thought it might be interesting to talk about these situations from least free to most free. One of the big improvisation lessons for me was to find out that you really have to be in the moment. Even though, of course, you can plan as much as you want, you can prepare, but when someone else plays a note you wanted to play or something that doesn't fit with your idea, like suddenly playing really loudly when you wanted to do a quiet section, you will have to adjust or find something together. This is also a big topic in improvisation theatre, where your fellow players will give you an offer, and it's most interesting when you try to do something with that. I think in performance of our written repertoire, the same can happen. Lately this was very exciting in a Telemann Trio Sonata, where my fellow players and I were really reacting to ideas in tempo, articulation, dynamics, etc. And afterwards some people in the audience also said like, oh yeah, was that an improvisation? Or what adventure happened there? The addition of or interpretation of trills and simple ornaments like appoggiaturas, mordents, etc. can also be a place for the improvisatory. I think we are well past the time where a trill was always performed in the same way for every piece. Yet the eloquence of these ornaments can always be in our vision, and we can always use them to add to our story in the moment. Recently, in a performance of Egmont, I added some ornaments to the lament to deepen the effect. At least I thought I did, including accento, portamento, and some appoggiaturas. As an oboist, one sometimes has to give an A to tune the orchestra or ensemble. Recently, I heard a friend of mine just add a little scale before, just to find his place on the instrument a bit. And this reminded me that actually in the past, tuning was often done with a little prelude or a little improvisation, however small. So I've started adding these, and I think beside the fact that I just felt more comfortable because I tapped into that more creative side of myself. It was also interesting how this worked out very nicely in a concert recently. So we had a lot of rehearsals, we were very tired, the first half wasn't great, and then in my tuning I just did a little quotation from Beethoven 5, which was a little bit funny, and it gave people the opportunity to just relax a little bit, or at least I hope so. We know from several descriptions that people used to improvise preludes, even as an ensemble, but let's not talk about that now, but definitely as a soloist. Rousseau even speaks about preludes for singers. And I think this could actually be quite an easy thing to add to our regular concerts. So let's do that. It could be even just 4 bars like I did in a little recording recently, or it could be, of course, a bit longer, as happened in a concert that I did with Anis Chen and Jason Marmoras in Weimar. We played the Telemann Trio Sonata and we each added a prelude before a movement. In these preludes, I personally like taking a motive from the piece that is coming and playing around with it a little bit. And I think each motive has a sort of a few possible stories in it, so to speak. And then I like using this motive, but maybe telling a slightly different story from the story that will happen in the actual piece, though of course are still related to the feel of what is coming next. This is similar to the idea of preludes, except it's inside a piece. So sometimes when going from one section to the next in the music, we can add a little bridge. Most often this is heard when you're going back to the beginning or going on to the next bit after the repeat sign with this typical scalar passage. This was sometimes called an Eingang, especially in the 18th and 19th century, and especially happened a lot in that period. It's a bit different from a cadenza, maybe obviously, but in a few typical ways, namely often it's only a few notes. It starts on the dominant rather than the tonic 6/4, and often it's not related to any motives or material from the actual piece of music. You might find some fermatas in your music which could be indications for Eingänge, like these two examples here. Recently, I got to play the aria in Vivaldi's Gloria again. A few times before, I have been told not to do any or severely minimize my ornamentation in this piece. And, of course, one could argue that it should indeed just be a simple little aria, since its text is Domine Deus and it's in the context of the church. On the other hand, we have quite some examples of simple pieces of music with a lot of ornamentation from that actual time, like from Corelli and Piasendal. And one could also argue that sacred music was starting to sound more and more like secular music. But ultimately, this is not really a discussion I want to address in much detail in this video. But it is important for me to note that you have a choice here. You can always ornament music, even Boulez or Shostakovich, even if someone thinks this was never done. And on the other side of the debate, you really don't have to ornament. Sometimes I hear people coming to a course and be like, yeah, well, I feel so ashamed, I should ornament, everybody says you should be able to. But even Quantz says that playing the air without ornamentation is totally fine, especially if you think it will sound better that way. In short, I think it's good to inform ourselves of what is possible and what was maybe done, and then just to make your own choice. This time around with the Vivaldi aria, I wanted to challenge myself to add as much ornamentation as I could, or perhaps dared, without it being there just for the sake of it. Eventually in the concert, I think it was quite nice, and I had really increased the ornamentation towards the end, and just in the penultimate section added lots of scalar things, maybe a bit too much. But then I could finish the final sentence and the final phrase very quietly, without ornamentation, and that gave the piece a really nice shape. Also, generally, personally, I think this piece can gain a lot in direction, fluidity and variety by adding at least some ornamentation. I'm only just feeling more comfortable with adding these kind of ornamentations after diving into some of Quantz's pedagogy and learning some of his ideas by heart. So if you would like to learn this as well, you could join my online courses, and there's a link in the description. So finally, coming back to Egmont, which we did in a cool chamber music setting with the Apollo Ensemble, there is another oboe solo which involves several options for Eingänge and little cadenzas. But I did mostly decide to just keep those as they are written. Beethoven wrote them in the score, so that suggests he kind of had an idea of what they were supposed to sound like. But I did decide that the final cadenza, which also ends on a rest for everyone else, would be a safe and perhaps a logical place to not play Beethoven's idea, which was also relatively simple in what he did. I think something that this adds to a normal concert is also that people start listening and wondering, oh yeah, what will happen tonight? And the night before the last performance, I had a dream about this cadenza, where I actually used some material from the following movement, which made it flow more into the next horn entrance in the version that we did. So I tried to use this idea in real life, and I was so happy with it that I forgot I was supposed to play right after that. So I'd like to invite you to experiment with some of these ideas in your regular performances as well. Let me know if you have any questions, if you have any experiments also that worked out or did not work out in the comments. I'd love to hear about those.